Good morning, everyone. As Mike said, my name's Dominic Pattinson. I work in DEFRA's Food Policy Unit, and I'm responsible for policy on public sector food procurement. I think this is a really timely opportunity to be talking about public sector food procurement. We've had a new government in place for around 6-9 months now. They, from a very early stage, set out their priorities, one of which was around public sector food procurement. And we've now had time to discuss that with ministers and officials and to work out exactly how they want to take forward those priorities. So hopefully I'll give you a flavour of how they're going to do that today. And I think, as Mike said in his opening remarks, it's very clear that sustainability is still very much on the agenda. And I think, you know, the comments Mike made around that being on the agenda for the private sector too, and those comments about Unilever and Sodexo are things certainly that I've heard about too. So what am I going to talk about today? Well, I mean, it's not a new area. The previous administration wanted to do things around public sector food procurement. I was involved in that then. We're not going to just forget about all the work we did beforehand. We'll take the learning from that work and try and use it in how we take forward the government's, this government's priorities. So starting off with just a quick update on where the government is on its food policy priorities and what that means for public sector food procurement. And then setting out sort of the actions that we're implementing to take them forward. So I don't know if any of you noticed, but a couple of weeks ago, DEFRA, along with all the other government departments, published their business plans for the spending review period, 2011-2015. We'd been working on this since sort of June, July, and there was a consultation on it over the summer. The overarching priorities for DEFRA, and this is DEFRA as a whole, not just the food area, are those 3 bullet points that you can see there. The food agenda sits mainly under that first one, which is about supporting British farming and encouraging sustainable food production. There's also, for us, on procurement, the 3rd bullet, where it talks about supporting a strong and sustainable green economy. That's very much sort of the work we're doing overlaps those two bullet points there. So in terms of how that sort of filters down and relates to our work on food policy, and this is the whole of food policy, not just public sector food procurement policy. Some of you might recognise those 6 boxes there. They came from some work that was begun sort of over a year ago now, so under the previous administration, and came out as part of the sort of Food 2030 strategy. That document was very much an evidence-based review, and the issues haven't really changed. The world population is growing. By 2050, there'll be a population of 9 billion that we're going to have to feed. Climate change is carrying on, will have to be addressed. Environmental pressures are still there. And, of course, there are diet-related health issues. None of those issues have changed. The food industry is still a significant industry in the UK. It's the largest manufacturing sector in the UK, over 3 million jobs. So that evidence base hasn't changed, and ministers have accepted that that evidence base haven't changed, and they've accepted that in taking forward our work on food policy, it makes sense to address it under those 6 themes that you see there. Just to highlight a couple of them that are particularly relevant to when we move on to sort of talk about food procurement. The first one, and there is a bit of a sort of theme to how they flow around, encouraging people to eat a healthier, more sustainable diet, encouraging a resilient and competitive food industry. One of the slight changes in emphasis, I think, with this administration is the emphasis that they want to put on ensuring that we have a competitive and resilient food and farming industry. And then all of the others there around addressing food waste, making sure food production is done, sustainability are also relevant. The way that our ministers have asked us to take this forward is to use that as our evidence base, but they very much want to focus on delivering practical actions in taking forward things. In particular, for us on procurement, they came in with some ideas on what they wanted to do, and I'm sure some of you would have seen some of the commitments that I'll come on to later around procurement, but also around country of origin labelling that they're working with the industry on. There's not only a UK context, there's also a European perspective. Back in 2008, the European Commission presented its proposals around what it wanted to do to address sustainable consumption and production, not just in the food area, but across the piece. What it wanted to focus on was improving the environmental performance of products and services, and to sort of increase demand for those goods. And that's relevant again for our work on public sector food procurement. Some of you may have seen this slide before. It's really just to highlight the fact that food and drink is a very significant or has a very significant impact in terms of its environmental effects. As you can see there, it's actually, you know, with building and appliances, the most significant one. So again, going back to the previous slides, the impacts of the food industry are still there. The issues haven't gone away, and this government sort of recognised that. One of the, sticking with the EU theme, one of the key tools, if you want, in the EU's box for addressing those impacts is green public procurement. And I won't read out the bullet points there, but it's around addressing sort of the impacts of public sector procurement decisions, making sure those are as sustainable as possible. One of there are 10 priority sectors that the EU is looking at, one of which is food. The others are picking up on that previous slide around construction, transport, energy, clothing and furniture, just to name some of them. What the EU has developed is a toolkit that's available on a EU website, and that provides guidance on how you can address what it has identified as the most significant impacts arising out of the, in this case, the food chain. It looks at sort of things like organic food, integrated production systems, sourcing from seafood from sustainable sources, animal welfare, and then on sort of the catering sort of services side of things, packaging waste, food waste, and sort of making sure that more products are recycled. And that's important for when I go on later on to talk about what we're doing in the UK too, because as you'll see, there's a reasonable amount of overlap with those priorities. There's also, a part of this green public procurement initiative, a political target that by 2010, so this year, 50% of all tendering procedures will be green. And what they mean by green is compliant with the green public procurement criteria that are set out for each of those 10 priority areas. The EU, I think, is measuring progress against that political commitment next year, so we'll get an idea of how far we are towards meeting it. So that was the UK position, priorities, the EU context. How that's related into specific food procurement commitments is two bullet areas within the DEFRA business plan that I mentioned earlier. First is about driving sustainable food procurement by the government, i.e. the government setting an example and showing leadership in this area.